Good evening, everyone. If you would take your seats, we're going to begin. Just so we're talking to.
Talk.
Welcome, and please, we'd like to begin. Hi, everyone. I'm Rabbi Susan Nanis, Director of Adult Programs here at Wilshire Boulevard Temple. And when Amy Grawer and Lauren Pimstone Harris came to me and said that they wanted to bring Ben M. Freeman, to Wilshire Boulevard Temple, it was several months ago, and to talk about Jewish pride, to talk about combating anti-Semitism, the history of anti-Semitism. Little did we know how relevant, sadly, this topic would be tonight, based on what's been going on in our country, all over our country, on social media. I just heard that the Holocaust Museum LA was bombarded with trolling yesterday. I just read that in Wellesley University, their student newspaper listed the Jewish owners of stores in town and said they should be boycotted because they probably are anti-Palestinian, not knowing one way or the other, just lumping it all together. It's quite upsetting, and we're very fortunate to have someone to talk about a psychological way and another way, an educational way and an action way to confront what's going on in our country. We have our moderator, who's a congregant at Wilshire Boulevard Temple, Shirin Yadigar. Can't read with my glasses. She's a mother, journalist, publisher, and TV host. Her magazine, LA Mom Magazine, shares expert advice to help parents live a healthier, more meaningful family life. And before becoming a mother, Shirin received her MA from USC's Annenberg School of Journalism and worked as a researcher and writer at the LA Times and was managing editor of the Beverly Hills Weekly. Another fact about Shirin is that her parents and grandparents, her parents escaped from Iran in the face of terrible anti-Semitism, and she just shared with me that her grandfather was the first Jew to be killed in Iran by a firing squad. So she is well aware of the consequences and the impact of anti-Semitism, of Jewish hatred. And she will be in conversation with Ben M. Freeman, who is a Jewish leader, a Jewish thinker, and a Jewish educator. He is the founder of the modern Jewish Pride movement. He is the author of Jewish Pride, Rebuilding a People and Reclaiming Our Story, The Pursuit of Jewish Pride. We have some of his books here that will be for sale at the end, and Ben will autograph them for you if you'd like that. He is an internationally renowned gay Jewish author and educator focusing on Jewish identity and historical and contemporary Jew hatred. He's been a Holocaust scholar for over 15 years, and he came to prominence. Oh, by the way, Ben is from Scotland. He's a Scottish Jew, lived in Hong Kong, and now lives in London. And so he came to prominence during the Corbyn Labour Jew hate crisis in London, in England, and quickly became one of his generation's leading Jewish thinkers and voices against anti-Jewish racism. Please welcome Shirin and Ben.
Thank you, Rabbi Nanis. Thank you all for joining us. I think this is the most important place that we should be tonight, sharing in this conversation with Ben M. Freeman. Thank you for joining us, Ben.
Thank you so much for having me. Can you all hear me?
Congratulations on your second book in your trilogy. This is Reclaiming Our Story, and we're going to get into this, but I want to talk a little bit about your first book, which is your Jewish Pride book, and I want to talk about the Jewish Pride movement and your journey on how you got there.
Sure. So I, as Rabbi Nana said, I'm also a gay man. And like many gay men, like many LGBTQ plus people, louder? Louder? Yes. Okay. Like many LGBTQ plus people, I had to go on a journey to LGBTQ plus pride. I was filled with self-loathing when I was a teenager. I really did not want to be gay. I really struggled with my identity. And I remember during a particular bout of ill mental health, I had this realization, and it was that I had done nothing wrong. And I was being punished for a crime I hadn't committed. I was being made to feel less than, I was being made to feel inferior, I was being made to have no self-esteem, and I had done nothing wrong. And that realization set me on the path to pride. Now, with regards to my Jewish identity, I've always been a proud Jew. The Scottish Jewish community is very small, but very mighty. We all lived in Glasgow, the city where I was born. There was 5 Jewish families on my street, and only 5,000 Jews in the whole of the country. So lots of Jews concentrated in one area. And we had to work very hard to be Jewish. It wasn't like in LA, you know, when my friends are driving me around and I'm seeing Jewish stores and centers and synagogues, it's kind of crazy to me. I remember when the Jewish butcher closed in Glasgow, the only Jewish butcher. We don't have a Jewish butcher anymore. But my Jewish identity was tested when I went to university. So I studied politics at the University of Glasgow, and it was incredibly left. And this was a long time ago. This was over 15 years ago. And this was a problem even then. And every day I was shamed. I was really being abused by my peers and my professors. And my professors allowed people to say the most horrendous things to me. And that made me kind of have a little bit of difficulty with my identity. But really what brought me to the Jewish Pride movement was Corbyn. So I don't know if any of you are aware, but Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. He was Her Majesty's most loyal opposition.
Ben, I'm sorry.
Even louder? Okay. Corbyn. So Jeremy Corbyn, is that better? No? That? Okay, I need to like kiss the microphone. This better? Oh, wow. Okay, I'll move it back. So Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party. He was on track to becoming Prime Minister. And he is a racist. He hates Jewish people. And he and his acolytes actively targeted us. This crisis went on for years. And at the 2018, well into the crisis, at the 2018 Labour conference, they handed out Palestinian flags. And all of the people at the conference waved them. And they were trolling us. They were saying to us, you can't touch us. We hate you, we're going to do what we're going to do, and there's nothing you can do about it. And everyone wanted us to shut up. The media kept referring to this as a row, or a row, a quarrel. It wasn't a quarrel. We were not fighting. The opposition party was actively targeting us. This was an attack on a tiny ethno-religious minority. There's about 300,000 Jews in the UK. And we would not stop talking about it. We would not shut up. And that was incredibly inspiring. But there were certain high-profile Jews who were not able to call Corbyn what he was, which was a racist. They were suffering from what I call the hangover of the keep your head down policy. Don't say anything, keep your head down, just get on with it. And they said, listen, we're going to vote for Corbyn. He might not be good for the Jews, but his other policies are good. You know who else said that? There was Jewish people in 1933 in Germany who said the same thing about the Nazis. They said this is not good for the Jews, but we put our Germanness ahead of our Jewishness. And I reflected on my experience as a gay man. I thought, no, this isn't good enough. We deserve better. We deserve to know that we deserve better. And using the lessons that I learned was what led me to write this book, and it's called Jewish Pride. And you know, somebody said to me about the cover that they really liked it, which was nice, of course. But if you see it, just says Jewish Pride with a big Magen David in the middle. Because I wanted it to be clear. We're not hiding. We're not going to be ashamed. We're not going to warp ourselves to be accepted. We're going to reject the shame that they impose on us, reject their definitions of our identity, because the only people who get to define Jewish identity and Jewish experience are Jewish people.
So I want to move on to your second book. It's a really powerful and honest account of how you admit to diminishing your own Jewishness because you are in a relationship with a Jew hater.
Yeah. Yeah, my first boyfriend is a racist. And as I said, I had a lot of trauma with regards to my identity as a gay man. I was very desperate to be in a relationship. And I met this slightly older guy, and he was a poet, so it was very romantic. And, you know, we fell in love, and we had this relationship, and then he started making comments about Israel, because my siblings live there. My brother lived in Israel, and at the time he was serving in the IDF. My sister lives there. Closer, even closer? My goodness. Okay, it feels like a bit intimate. So my family were very Zionist, very deeply connected to Israel. And as time went on, my then boyfriend began to say stuff to me like, you know, I don't think we could ever get married, which is not the thing you want to hear your partner say, in all honesty. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, I don't want to be connected to Israel. He then moved to China after we broke up. This was about Jews. It wasn't about perceived human rights abuses. It wasn't about perceived occupation. This was about Jews. And then actually, years later, I had to block him on social media because he would hound me. And he would talk about Corbyn, and he'd say, you got the Tories, the Conservative Party, elected because you didn't want Labour, because the Jews don't want Labour, because he'll raise the taxes, because he won't criticize Israel, or he will criticize Israel. It was outrageous, and I accepted it. I wrote this book, Jewish Pride, and I was in a relationship with someone who hated Jews. So I diminished my Jewishness. I would say I'm Jewish, but. I'm Zionist, but. What does that mean? I was trying to be a good Jew. I wanted people around me, the non-Jewish world around me, to say, okay, you're Jewish, but we'll still accept you. We get you. You're just like us. And what I had to understand is actually, I'm not just like them. We can be friends. I can live in the UK and I can be British and it's great. But I'm a Jew. I'm a British Jew. There's a reason there's a hyphenated identity there. But I didn't want to be a British Jew. I wanted to be a British guy who, you know, happened to be Jewish and it's a wee bit quirky and whatever else. No. And now I reject that.
Let's talk a little bit more about internalized anti-Jewishness. We're in a room with who I think would all say they're proud American Jews. With a show of hands, can you show me if you feel proud to be Jewish? So I think it's almost unanimous that we're all proud to be Jewish. But how many parents in here feel comfortable with their children walking out of the house right now with the Magen David? Who feels comfortable? Not so many.
Less.
Not so many. So is this a global Jewish problem, this internalized feeling? Is it a European Jewish problem?
It is certainly a global Jewish problem, and I think it's actually a pandemic. And in the first book, I talk about this phenomenon called internalized anti-Jewishness. And you might have heard of it referred to as self-hate. And that's a term that I reject for a variety of reasons, but it's ultimately the same thing. And I have in this chapter, in this book, a chapter about it, and it's the most extreme examples, the anti-Zionist Jews. In the UK, we call them as a Jews, who say, well, as a Jew, I think Corbyn's okay. But I did hundreds of speaking engagements to promote this book. And in every single one, people were asking about that chapter. And then people messaged me on social media, because I'm on Instagram and Twitter, at Ben M. Freeman, for those of you who have social media. And people were messaging me saying, hey, your book helped me deal with my internalized anti-Jewishness. And this is from people who were identifying as proud Jews. So it kind of got me thinking, this is more than just the anti-Zionist Jews. This is a bigger problem. And then again, I reflected on my own experience. I had it when I said, I'm Jewish, but. I'm Zionist, but. Wanting to be a good Jew, wanting to be a palatable Jew. That was all expressions of internalized anti-Jewishness. And it was really using non-Jewish ideas of Jewishness to define my identity. Non-Jewish expectations of what it means to be a Jew to define my identity. And I had to do work to reject that. But it's a global problem. It's certainly in the United States. And again, I want to say, you can be a proud Jew and still experience it. There is this idea that, no, this is only a problem for certain types of Jews. That's not the case. My family were Zionist. My siblings lived in Israel. I worked for the Jewish community for the UJIA. And I was still saying I'm Jewish, but I'm Zionist, but. Identity is complicated. It's layered. And we are a minority. And when you are a minoritized community, there is a power dynamic. And we're often receiving messages from the world around us. In the US, in the UK. In the UK, we say prayers for the royal family every Shabbat. May the Lord God bless our sovereign lady, Queen Elizabeth II, except, well, not now, right? King Charles III. We're trying so hard to be accepted. Has it always been returned? No, I don't think it has. And it's okay to want to be involved in the country that you live. It's okay to want to be British or American, but it's a relationship. And we will integrate, but they must respect our specificity because we are specific. We are an ancient civilization whose contemporaries were the Babylonians and the Romans and the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks. And we have to honor that.
You talk a lot about Zionism. I think this is so important to talk about. Zionism was a response to Jew hatred, but the word now is really thrown around by politicians and musicians, and it's all over social media as something negative. Can you define Zionism for us and talk to us, especially now that we have a lot of teenagers in this room, about how we can feel proud about being Zionists today?
Absolutely. So Zionism is a Jewish concept created by Jews, for Jews, and rooted in thousands of years of Jewish history. Modern political Zionism, that as you say was born out of a response to Jew hatred, came about in the 19th century. And modern political Zionism is the movement of self-determination to return the Jews to their indigenous land, the land of Israel. We are an indigenous people. That is our land. Our history was interrupted, and we were expelled through ethnic cleansing and genocide. And the word Zionism has been stolen from us. It has been bastardized into something else. It is a Jewish concept created by Jews, for Jews, rooted in Jewishness. When we say L'Shana Haba Yerushalayim next year in Jerusalem, that is a Zionist declaration. When the Jews sat in Babylon and said, we're weeping when we remember Zion, that is a Zionist declaration. And that was 2,500 years ago. And we must not allow the world around us to steal that from us. Because you actually cannot separate Jewishness from Israel. You cannot. We can have discussions about policy, we can have discussions about what a modern state would look like, but the right of the Jews to have self-determination in their indigenous land is something we were yearning for millennia. And you cannot separate it. And we must not allow the world around us to steal and redefine our concepts. That is a humiliation, and we will not endure it.
But how do you handle it? You are a gay Jewish man. You deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's what you do. You walk into spaces that are LGBTQ+ as a Jew, and then what happens?
Well, they give me space to define my LGBTQ+ identity. They say to me, what are your pronouns? Are you gay? Are you queer? Are you LGBTQ+? They're inviting me to define who I am and how I want to be perceived by the world. And then that conversation goes, and then I say, I'm also Jewish. And this is how I feel about my Jewishness. And I say, in the box on the census, you know, the box that asks you your identity, I don't tick white. I tick other, and I write Jewish. And they say to me, whoa, 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 whoa. But you're a white man. And I say, well, you know, we can have a conversation about this, but I'm a Jew, and this is how I feel. Say, no, you're a white man. And I think, who the hell do these people think they are? I'm allowed to define my own identity. And whether the people in this room would tick the white box or not, I kind of don't really care, to be honest. It's not my business. But we have to be defining our own identities. And that is something we see in the LGBTQ+ community and in the wider progressive community, that Jews are being denied that right. And it is our right. And what makes it more infuriating is the same rights are being given to other people. I'm a gay man and I'm a Jew. And when I talk about my sexual orientation, they invite me to define it. And when I talk about my Jewishness, they tell me what I am. And it is disgusting.
But I feel that a lot of times you'll walk into a space and it's okay to be Jewish, but it's not okay to love Israel and call Israel your homeland. So how do you handle that?
Well, I reject it. And I reject notions of good Jews and bad Jews. There are no good Jews and bad Jews. They are categorizations created by the world around us. Good Jews are Jews who are palatable, are Jews like I used to be. I'm Jewish, but. I'm Zionist, but. Bad Jews, particularly in the left, are Jews who will be Zionist, Jews who will support Israel, Jews who will not shrink themselves. And that is something we have to reject. So in those LGBTQ plus spaces, I don't go anymore. And there is a conversation, right, about do we give up the space? Do we spend time in these spaces fighting? I'm a busy guy. I've got a finite amount of energy. I don't want to go to hang out with people who don't want to hang out with me. I want to hang out with people who understand me, who give me space, and that includes non-Jewish people, right? My partner's not Jewish, my friends are not Jewish, many of them in London, but they give me space to define who I am, and they do not tell me who I am, because that is a humiliation.
Yes, it is absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing all over Los Angeles right now. On October 11th, Kanye, who has 18 million Instagram followers and over 31 million Twitter followers, more followers than there are Jews in the world, tweeted, "I'm going DEFCON on Jewish people." On October 23rd, a white supremacist group hung banners on the 405 freeway saying, "Kanye is right about the Jews," and "honk if you agree." That same Sunday, a graffiti was found at several American universities saying, "Kill all the Jews, Kanye was right." Also that same Sunday, leaflets were left on many of our doorsteps in different neighborhoods in Los Angeles, blaming the Jews for COVID and controlling the world. You write in your book that history has shown us that we cannot make the non-Jewish world accept us, but then how do we respond to it?
The response is pride. And pride teaches us something. It teaches us that we deserve better. We feel that we deserve better. We tell our children that we deserve better, that they deserve better, and we fight back by raising our voices and by sharing our experiences. And we fight back because we are at war. The Corbyn experience in the UK was a war. And it was one that we seemed to win for a moment. But there is a cultural capital that is not in our favour. And as you say, Kanye has more followers on social media than there are Jews in the world many times over. And you have people like John Legend, who is a particular bugbear of mine, who is tweeting in support of Jews, but then saying that Israel should be treated to a double standard. That is not allyship. We're not going to accept scraps. That is awful. Israel, like any other country, should be, and it should be treated as such. It should not be treated with double standards. If you refer to Natan Sharansky's 3D test, that is an example of Jew hate. And what we are seeing is Jew hate being re-normalized. Anti-Jewishness is the default position. And it is in the foundations of the world we're standing in. Christianity, which is the foundations of the Western world, America, the UK, Europe, many other places, that was founded, that was created in opposition to Jews. The Christians said, you keep kosher, we're not going to keep kosher. You circumcise, we're not going to circumcise. And then it became part of the Roman Empire, and then it became embedded. These ideas became embedded. And we have to recognize that fact. And yes, there were periods, particularly post-Holocaust, where things seemed to be better, and we thought, maybe we've escaped, maybe this is over, maybe the world has learned its lesson. And they have not learned their lesson quite clearly. And we should not trust them. And that is not me saying we shouldn't, that is not me saying we should not live here. We should not live in Britain. We can live in these societies. But there is a phrase that's screw me badly once, shame on you. Screw me badly twice, shame on me. We need to wake up. Why are we trusting people in a world that does not give us a reason to trust? This is Los Angeles. This is the United States. When I grew up, we watched An American Tale. And I remember very clearly there are no cats in America and the streets are paved with cheese. I'm not singing it. Maybe later we can have a sing-along. And I understood what they were talking about as a child in Glasgow. Oh, America. America's the place where there was no cats. It was never true. It was a myth we were all sold. And yes, there was a period. I mean, we're in Los Angeles with all these amazing Jewish places. There was a period when it was easier. But it's returned to its default position. And we have to recognize that fact. Because that is the reality of the world we're living in. We have to prepare our children. And we have to understand why Kanye West is saying what he is saying. Because this is bigger than Kanye. This is bigger than the signs on the 405 freeway. There is a thread running throughout thousands of years of history. The pogroms are part of it. The Farhud is part of it. Kanye is part of it. And we have to wake up and understand what is happening to us. And I don't like to be the bearer of bad news, but we are at war. And we have to arm ourselves with knowledge and with pride and understand what they say about us is wrong.
You say we're at war and we need to arm ourselves. How do we do it? I mean, we're in a Jewish synagogue. We're educating students as best that we can. We have Shabbat dinners. We gather. What else can we be doing as a society to arm ourselves, to prepare ourselves?
Well, I think having conversations like this, thank you, Rabbi, it's really important. We have to have frank and honest conversations where we feel safe to ask the questions and to say the things that we're thinking. Because we move through the world, we navigate the world, and we're trying to understand, okay, how are we going to do this? How are we going to fit in here? What can I say? What can't I say? Particularly with regards to Israel. It affects our social lives. It affects our professional lives. It affects every aspect of our lives. And we have to educate. And we have to educate beyond the biblical stories. We have to understand where we came from. So we have to know that the first mention of the word Israel was on the Merneptah stele from 3,300 years ago. That is incredible. And the Merneptah stele is an Egyptian engraving. And it was celebrating the defeat of the Canaanites and other people and us. And it tells us that we were established enough to warrant a mention. That is our history. That is where we come from. And we have to know it. We are an incredible, diverse, rich civilization. We have to respect that. We have to honor it. We have to teach it. Education is our lifeblood. If we drop the ball, all it takes is 1 or 2 generations for the whole thing to fall apart. And it will. And to be quite honest, we're seeing it. And then we have to root ourselves in action. I'm not a religious Jew. I'm pretty secular, to be honest, but I'm wearing a tartan kippah. You might call it plaid. It's tartan. And every day, the last thing I do before I leave the house, whether I'm in LA, whether I'm in London, is I put on my kippah. And the reason I do that is because for thousands of years, we were marked as Jews. They put signs of our Jewishness onto us to humiliate us, to segregate us. I love being a Jew. So I want to mark myself as a Jew. I want to wear my kippah, I want to wear my Magen David, and I want to move through the world as a Jew. And that's what we have to do.
That's how we should all feel. That's how we should all feel, because there's so much to be proud of. How many Nobel Peace Prize, what have we contributed to the world as Jews?
Yeah.
And I'm looking out at all of you young people in this room to make you realize how important it is to know where you come from and to have your feet rooted in this, to feel proud, to walk out and to wear your kippah and your Magen David, to say, I am a Jew, I am proud of all the great things that we're doing for civilization.
Absolutely. And we are here in 2022. I'm from Scotland. Many of you are American. And we have come together to talk about our Jewishness. 2,000 years after we were expelled? 80 so years after the Shoah? After hundreds of years after the Spanish Inquisition? And we're still here. And not only have we survived, which is miraculous enough, but we have thrived. Look at the incredible cultures we've created. Ashkenazi culture, Mizrahi culture, Bet Israel, Sephardic, all of these incredible cultures. They're an expression of our undying commitment to Jewishness. And they were the people who came before us, and they've handed us the baton. Because Jewishness does not belong to any of us. We are caretakers of it for future generations. We do the work. We take care of it. We make them proud Jews. And then we hand over to them, and they go forward. That is what we have to do. And it's very difficult because we have a world that constantly tries to shame us. And we just say, no, we're not tolerating it. We're not accepting it, and we will not see our Jewishness as a source of shame. It is something we are deeply proud of.
Absolutely. So when people gaslight us, we saw it with Candace Owens. I mean, she recently came out and said, whoever believes Kanye is anti-Semitic is crazy, right? That's gaslighting. And we see it all the time. So how do we respond to that? How do we stand strong against that? In person, on social media, what do we say to that?
We have to honor our instincts. You know, when I speak to my non-Jewish friends and I say, oh, that person just looked at my Magen David, and they were like, was it good or was it bad? And even if they just glanced, you kind of know. And I was like, yeah, it was bad. Or that person was like, wow, I love your tartan kippah. You know, you can tell. You can tell when someone is being positive or someone's being negative. Trust your instincts, because we're being gaslit. This is an emotional manipulation, and it's purposefully happening. This is not something that's just happening by accident. The wider world is manipulating the situation. The New York Times is constantly talking about the great chasm in the Jewish community. Anti-Zionism is growing in the Jewish community, and we need to be aware of that. But the vast majority of Jews are still Zionist. It is not a chasm. They need to relax. Qatar is funding universities. Yale University is the worst offender. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being given, and those universities are 64 times more likely to be unsafe for Jews. This is purposeful manipulation. And we have to trust our instincts, we have to trust our self-perception, and ultimately we have to reject the feeling that we want their acceptance. I want to be a British person, I'm happy to be in Britain. I cried when the Queen died like everyone else, it was like mandatory obviously. But I'm a Jew. And I'm not going to warp my Jewishness, change my Jewishness to be accepted. And I will not allow them to gaslight me into doubting myself. When people say horrendous things to us, like well, you know, Israel's an apartheid state. Israel's a colonial entity. They are lies. It's anti-Jewish lies that were, again, purposely spread by the Soviet Union. Purposeful manipulation. And we have to reject it. And that is how we deal. And in this second book, Reclaiming Our Story, I talk about Jewish anchors. We have to root ourselves into our Jewishness with action, with education, because there is a hurricane around us. And we have to be grounded into our Jewishness so that we are standing strong regardless of what is happening around us. Because we will work to fight it, we'll work with non-Jewish allies to fight Jew hatred, but it is a non-Jewish problem.
Non-Jewish problem. It's in your book over and over again. You're not trying to solve Jew hatred. You say we're not going to see the end of Jew hatred in our lifetime. And when you speak to Jews, your main mission is to help heal Jews and help them navigate. So what's your biggest advice you want to leave us with tonight on how we can heal and how we can navigate in this world of Jewish hate?
I mean, it sounds cliched, but it's pride. And I think that within pride, there's practical components. I've mentioned a couple of them already. Education. And I'm a former teacher. I used to teach in Hong Kong. And as teachers, it's all about lifelong learning. You never stop learning. You never stop being able to grow and being able to evolve your perspective. We have to continuously understand on a deeper level who and what we are, where we come from. And then we have to ground ourselves into our Jewishness with our anchors. And we have to talk about things that are uncomfortable, like Jewish pain and Jewish trauma. I was standing in the streets of Hong Kong with my partner, and it was during COVID, and we were waiting for a pizza place. And in Hong Kong, you can drink on the streets. And people were drinking, and people had their masks off. And the Hong Kong police, who you might have heard are fairly aggressive, had taped off the top of the street. And then they marched down the street with a megaphone. And they were kind of shouting in Cantonese and then in English to go home or put on your masks. And I started having a panic attack. Because then they started cordoning off the bottom of the street. And I was looking around and my palms started sweating. And this was in December, so it was cold. And I said to my partner, I have to go. I have to get out of here. And he was like, what's going on? I was like, I have to go. I felt so uncomfortable. And afterwards, I went home and he came with the pizza and he was like, what was that? I was like, I don't really know. And then I thought about it a little bit. I think I was triggered. And I speak to Jews all over the world and they talk about these experiences. They talk about getting off trains and being uncomfortable. They talk about having physical suitcases packed, mental suitcases packed, nightmares about Nazis, nightmares about persecution. These things just go on in our community and we don't really talk about it. We don't talk about Jewish trauma. We don't talk about how difficult it can be to be a Jew in the wider world. And I understand in some ways why we don't talk about it. Because actually, when you start to kind of unravel and you pull the thread, it's not necessarily comfortable. But we have to have these conversations. Because the problem is that many Jews around the world are having these experiences and they're not sharing them. So there's no comfort in our community. We have them in our silos. We have experienced trauma and we're not victims. We are proud, resilient survivors. But that fact does not negate the fact that we have experienced trauma. And we have to recognize it, and we have to honor it and process it, and ultimately reclaim our connection with ourselves and our Jewishness. In my second book, I interview this woman who lost 90 members of her family during the Shoah. And her father said to her, we're going to stop this trauma. We're cutting it off. And how did he do that? By stopping Jewishness. So she wasn't raised Jewish. She had no connection with Judaism. We have to have these conversations. They're not always easy, they're not always comfortable, but they are imperative. And I have to say, we are generations behind other communities. The black community, the LGBTQ plus community are further ahead than us. And we have to catch up, and we have to create generations of Jews who love their Jewishness, who feel whole in their Jewishness, and who are able to define what it means to be a Jew from a Jewish perspective, and a Jewish perspective only.
Well, thank you for having this conversation with us tonight and for educating us and helping us move in the right direction. And to Rabbi Nanas and Wilshire Boulevard Temple for always being a sacred space for us to learn and grow as Jews. I know that some of you have to get back to class, and so I wanted to open it up to questions from people in the audience. Yes?
Everybody will get a chance to have a question, to ask a question.
My question has to do with understanding who your enemies are. You can't fight somebody unless you know where it's coming from. I'm especially interested in, the diversion of our resources through Tikkun Olam, trying to rebuild and help people who actually work to destroy us. If you could elaborate on that for a little bit.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think particularly in America, I have to say, and this was the case in Britain to an extent, but it's an endless conversation about which is worse, the right or the left. Jew hate is really equal opportunity, actually. It comes from all over the place, the right, the left, other minorities. And social justice is a good thing. We have people in our community who belong to also other communities, right? Chinese American Jews, black Jews, LGBTQ plus Jews, so we should be supporting other communities. However, we're allowed to center ourselves. And we're also allowed to say we're not going to support communities that do not return it. And that really is a choice for each individual person. But I want to tell the story of Albert Memmi, who was a Tunisian Jew. And he was a young Tunisian Jew during the Tunisian independence movement. And he says the old Jews in the ghetto, that's how he referred to them, they said to him, don't take part in this movement. It has nothing to do with us. And he said, no, I'm a young Tunisian, I'm going to fight, it's going to be great. And he did. And what did Tunisia do? They expelled the Jews. And he said, we cannot forget our historic responsibility to ourselves. We're allowed to center ourselves. In actual fact, we must center ourselves. And we can be supportive of other communities. But allyship has to be a two-way street. We are not in a position where the hatred that we experience is historic. It is current. It impacts us. And when we're told, you've had your time, you be quiet now, that endangers us. And we have to know, like we have to know that we deserve better, we have to feel able to advocate for ourselves.
How do you explain thousands of years of anti-Semitism, is that rational, or would you address the reasons for that?
It's such a good question, and it's such an important question. It is not rational by any stretch of the imagination, but there is an explanation. And I think the explanation lies, and I kind of reference this, and really in the Western world and Christianity, and in the Arab world and Islam, but with specific reference to Christianity. As I said, the early Christians were Jews. They kept the Torah as part of their Bible. So they then had to market themselves. I mean, it was really a branding exercise. They had to market themselves and explain, why are we different to Jews? Okay, so the Jews circumcise, as I said, we don't circumcise. The Jews keep kosher, we're not going to do that. And then you had a parting of the ways. And then you had the Roman Empire convert to Christianity. And Christianity then becomes a part of the imperial force of the Roman Empire. And you had this tradition of defining yourself against Jews. And then you have another layer, which is the accusation that the Jews killed Jesus. Because who killed Jesus? It was the Romans. And then in 380 CE, it becomes incredibly awkward because you're now worshipping the guy who you murdered 350 years earlier. So they had to find a new scapegoat. So they chose the Jews. And then that began the process of further embedding this into Western Christian society. It began the process of even further defining themselves against Jews and creating ideas of Jews. And this is the mad thing. Jew hatred is insane. It's bonkers. Because it's not about any of us. It's about ideas of us. When they're defining themselves against us, they're not thinking about Ben from Glasgow. They're thinking about this mythical beast that they've created in their minds with horns. So they've created this boogeyman, essentially, that represents the Jews. And they use it to define their identities, and they use it to understand the world. But the problem is that it's not a boogeyman, it's us. And they have to react against us. And the Enlightenment was an opportunity for, whoa, maybe things are going to be okay. The French have chopped their kings' heads off. It's going to be great. And they couldn't overcome it. Because it is like a root, it's like a weed with roots that go down further than we can even imagine. And sometimes people come up and they chop off the bit at the top. I don't know anything about plants, so the stem, I guess. And it grows back. Because it is in the world we're standing in. And David Nierenberg, who's a Jewish, brilliant academic, says anti-Judaism, which is what he calls it, is not some closet in the vast edifice of Western Christian thought. It is part of the way this Christian thought was built. And that is uncomfortable because we live in this world. We live in the Western world. You're American, I'm British, and we belong to these societies. But in actual fact, in some ways, these societies are designed to be against us. And that is a difficult thing to come to terms with, and that's what makes integrating as a collective so difficult.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk tonight. It's fantastic. I was curious to know what specific words can we say to people if they say anti-Jewish things to us, anti-Israel things? You know, a lot of times I think to myself, how would I respond? Would I say, well, you have an iPhone, you know, Jews created the chip. Or do you use Waze? You know, Israel created that. I mean, just like certain specific things that are helpful in their lives. And then I talk about, you know, I think to myself, would I talk about, you know, gay people in the Middle East? What country is, you know, protects them? Yep. Israel's the only one. So what do you think? What are specific things you can say?
I think those are all really good examples, but I kind of go a little bit further back and I simply say, do you think you know more about this than me? Do you think you know more about this than me? That is what I say to people. I'm a Jew.
Do you think you know more about this than me?
I'm a Jew. This is my experience. My family live in Israel. My family fled pogroms. Does Joe Bloggs from London think he knows more about this than me? We have to stop debating with people who do not engage in good faith. Part of pride is having boundaries. I will not debate whether the Holocaust happened. I will not debate whether anti-Zionism is a form of Jew hate. And I will not debate whether the Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel, because that would be a humiliation. And I think that that is what we have to say. We will explain, we will invite clarifying questions if you don't understand, but we will not debate who and what we are, because they do not understand it. And when you say to them, do you think you know more about this than me? They're obviously taken back because non-Jewish people are not used to such chutzpah. And they don't know what to say. And they're like, I'm like, yeah, exactly. And if you want to know, please ask a clarifying question. But you have to ask it politely, you have to ask it in good faith, and you have to understand that when my non-Jewish, if I say to them, when you talk about Israel, you're talking about something on the news. This is my life. This is my survival. This is my home. This is where my family lives. So I say, if you're going to engage in it, you better be respectful. And I think that what I found is, some people don't like that, obviously. But some people are like, okay, I understand. And whether they understand or not, we're not going to debate. We invite clarifying questions, but we're not debating our existence. And I think the reality is that when we start talking, and listen, what you said, Cherie, we have contributed an unbelievable amount of things to civilization. But they don't care, because we're the boogeyman. So we have to just say, we're not engaging in this debate. We're not having this. Please ask politely. And just say, nope.
I think also Ben is saying we're not going to apologize or make excuses for ourselves. We don't have to. We don't have to. I just want to go on this side, and I'll come back to in the back here.
Hi, so I'm a teacher of some pretty amazing teens. They're all right here. And so I'd like to ask, what advice do you have for this group of teens who are creating their identity as they are looking at universities and experiencing the world through social media, with you know, Bella Hadid and Kanye and all these kind of anti-Semitic figures being spread around and in their culture. So what advice do you have for them as they kind of define themselves as Jews?
I would say root yourself into your Jewishness. Prioritize your Jewishness. Define yourself as Jews. It doesn't need to be as just Jews, but defining yourself as Jews means that that is how you move through the world, and that is how you consider the world. So when you choose the colleges you go to, think carefully about whether this college is going to be a place where you can be happy, where you can thrive, where you'll be safe. And if it's a college like Harvard or Berkeley, let's call them out, or like Yale, then you're allowed to say, no. Not only do you not get my money, but you don't get my brilliance. We have talent. Why would we give it to these people? And I think that's it. You know, we're seeing Jews all over the world put the words proud Jew into their social media bios. So on social media, you have to write a little explanation of yourself. And people are writing proud Jew. And that is how they are declaring themselves to the world. This is who I am. We will not apologize, as you said, Rabbi. We're not going to warp ourselves. This is who I am. And no one gets to tell me any differently about it. And I'm going to prioritize it and center it.
Hello. So, you know, with everything going on today, you know, everybody in the world is having this conversation, maybe for the first time in their lives. So, if we're all going to encounter these conversations with people who know absolutely nothing, or people who know very little. I guess, how do we have these conversations? You know, there's just so little education on the Jewish experience to the majority of the people of the world. And even within the Holocaust, so many people know nothing about the Holocaust or very little about the Holocaust, and it's shocking. But how do you even have these conversations when they know nothing, and they look at you and they don't see you as a victim at all, or as someone who's having problems, like they might be having problems. So I guess, what's your advice in those conversations?
I think that there's two things. One is education has to be carried out without judgment. People are taught, some people are not. And if we're explaining things, it has to be done without judgment, without you should know this, because they weren't taught it. And then the second part is, what story are we telling? This is storytelling. We have to tell our story. The second book is called Reclaiming Our Story. Nice plug right there. But that's it, right? There's a beginning. So when people say to me, well, especially in Scotland, I was the first Jew that many people had ever met. And they'd say to me, well, who are the Jews? What are the Jews? And I'd go back to the beginning. I'd say we were a people that emerged in the Middle East, in the Levant, and we built a civilization there, a culture, a religion, and this is the things that it involved, and these are the festivals I still celebrate: Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot. And then we were expelled by this group and by that group, and then this is where we went, and that where we went. And then this was our experience, and that was our experience. We have to tell them a story. And we have to do it with an understanding that they haven't been told it before. And that is frustrating, but it isn't necessarily each individual person's fault. So I'd say educate without judgment and tell the story. And particularly with Holocaust education, right? I've been a Holocaust educator for 15 years. And what people tend to do is start in 1933 and end in 1945. It's a literal waste of time. And then some people say, okay, so we'll start in 1918. It's not much better. When I teach my Holocaust class, it's a 3-month class. We don't get to the Nazis until week 4 or 5. Because the first month is explaining who are the Jews, what are the Jews, what is Jew hatred, how is it manifested throughout history, and you're telling a full story. And then it doesn't stop in 1945, right? You then talk about Arab rejectionism. You talk about the plight of the Soviet Jews. You talk about the Persian Jews. You tell these stories so people understand the fullness of our experience. And I think that's the most important. And what that really requires is for us to be educated. We can't tell our story if we don't know it. So the first thing to do is we need to study. We need to understand. We need to be lifelong learners. So then we can tell other people.
I just have a question. If we offered an evening or two of how to tell our story, how many people would attend that? Okay, you can consider it done. It will happen very soon. Okay, I'm going to come in the back here.
Hi, thanks for speaking tonight. I'm a Team Israel Olympian in Tokyo 2020 and proud alumni of Yale University also, and the Jewish community there. So if you want to send your kids to Yale, it's a good place to go. Anyways,
you can debate that.
So I've gotten used to talking to people about Israel and my experience in Israel. I'm just wondering, what do you accept as like legitimate criticism, and how do you kind of balance the two of being legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's actually very complicated. And each of us will probably have a different line of where that boundary will be. I base my differentiation of legitimate criticism of Israel and anti-Zionism on Natan Sharansky's 3D test. So Natan Sharansky, the Soviet refusenik, created the 3D test, which is you ask yourself, does this statement demonize Israel, delegitimize Israel, and treat it with double standards? And that is how I differentiate. And we as Jews understand that there is a breadth of perspectives in our community. You know, it can be a little annoying, actually. We love a good debate. So I'm sure if we really got into debating Israeli policy or this, that, or the next thing, we'd probably all disagree with one another. And some people would be more critical, some people would be less critical, and that's fine. But you have to be operating from a place of truth, and you have to be operating within a boundary. And the difficulty is that there is a much greater context than just 1948 to 2022, or even 1917 to 2022. And it's 2,000 years of Jew hatred. And sometimes people say to me, hey, I want to learn about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Where should I start? And I'm like, okay, so you need to start learning about Jew hatred, because that explains the diasporic perspective, and it also explains the Arab perspective. Why has there not been peace thus far? It is about Jew hatred. And that does not excuse Israel, right, from doing this, that, or the next thing. We can have those conversations. But we have to work within boundaries. And each person who wants to criticize Israel needs to be making damn sure that they're not inadvertently sliding into Jew hatred, because it's super easy. You know, we see people employ blood libel. And these are not people who have an awareness of the accusation of blood libel from 1144.
Do people know what the blood libel is? The blood libel was the accusation that Jews killed, this is in Russia and earlier, Christian children and used their blood to make matzah. And that is a belief among some anti-Semites.
Yeah, and it has become part of perspectives on Jews. So the accusation that Israel purposefully kills Palestinian children to steal their organs is a modern example of blood libel. Because that is not making an accusation that Palestinian children are killed in war. That is saying that Israel is a specific evil. And I want to say the fact that we even have to have that conversation about what's legitimate criticism and what's not is deeply unfair. We don't have that about any other country. Like, you know, Britain and America invaded Iraq, and people criticize that, some people don't criticize it, but no one is having a conversation about whether these countries have a right to exist. No one is questioning whether Britain has a right to exist. And Britain did quite a few terrible things in the world. And we're all just like, okay, well, you know, God save the king. Like, it's a double standard, and we have to start understanding that. And harsh criticism is fine, even if you and I could debate it, right? And I would disagree with you, or you could disagree with me. You again have to be operating within a boundary of kind of good faith and an understanding of the greater context.
I have more of an observation than a question, and I welcome your reaction. And people have talked about our contribution to society, and it seems to me that as a credit to the Jewish people, but I actually don't think it's a credit in their mind. I think it's a demerit. And whether you look at, you know, Israel in the 50s and 60s was an underdog, so it was easy to root for, and now they're not, at least relative to the Palestinians. And you talked about allyship, but similarly, you know, our success counts against us. It's sort of this annoying seeming exception. And it's not about the strength of arguments, it's about the result. It's not who did what and what cause and effect is, but you've been successful in general as a group, and so we don't care about what you're going through, because you're not going, you know, we're doing worse, so what you're going through doesn't matter anymore. Israel's stronger than the Palestinians. It doesn't matter who or why. It's just, you know, people of bad faith, you're not going to get through to them. But people even of good faith, they look at it and they think, I'm a very nice charitable person. I see what the Palestinian people, putting aside the politics and the leaders, are going through, and it looks terrible, so I feel bad for them. And so therefore, that means they're right. I don't know what to do about it. I'm a bit pessimistic about it, just because it seems like it's not susceptible to convincing anybody. It's just the results are what they are, and that determines the outcome of who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah, and I think that, well, number one, internally, we still celebrate those things. Because actually we had this conversation in the car on the way over, the fact that there is any Jewish wealth is kind of incredible. Like, the fact that there is intergenerational wealth in this community is remarkable. And we don't talk about it. Because people say the Jews are wealthy and powerful. And we don't talk about the fact that 25% of the Nobel Prize winners are Jewish. Because, oh, that proves the conspiracy. So internally we reject it. Because it's a miracle. It is remarkable and it's amazing, and we should be proud of it. And actually we should be a model to other communities. And I think that's how we explain it. That's how I explain it to my friends. My grandfather was brought over from Lithuania as a baby. He was a refugee. And look what our family have built in the UK. Look what we have built despite our experiences. Look at Israel. Let's remember that Israel was re-established, reborn in 1948, just 3 years after the Shoah ended. It's a miracle. And we have to recontextualize it. And you're right. Those who are acting in bad faith, they have no interest in listening. So what do? We block them. That's a social media reference. And you can block them in real life too. Don't debate with people who don't want to have a conversation with you, who don't respect your right to be a human being and be alive. And for those who are acting in good faith, we recontextualize it and say, I understand the way it looks, let's understand it a bit deeper. Israel is, my maths is so appalling, I'm not even going to try and work it out. Israel is how old? Can someone who's good at maths tell me? 1948? 70? 74 years old. Look at it. And let's look at what happened during those first 20 or so years. How many times was it invaded? What happened in 1967? Let's talk about that. Who was trying to destroy us? And what did we do? And it's all reclaiming our experience and identity and not allowing them to define it. And us advocating for who we are and explaining. And for those who aren't interested in listening, screw them.
I know everybody, I want to go to some people in the back. There's some kids.
So you talked a little bit about the nuance. You talked a little bit about the nuances of being a queer Jew and what that means in LGBTQ plus spaces and the hostility towards Jews in those spaces. But no matter the religiousness of Jewish spaces, there can sometimes be hostility towards queer people. So how do we, as queer Jews, reconcile and be proud of our queer identity inside Jewish spaces?
It's a really important question, so thank you. We as a community have a responsibility to all Jews. To Jews who have intersection identities, black Jews, Asian Jews, and that includes LGBTQ plus Jews. We have a responsibility as a community to these people. Why? Because they are Jews. And whatever your thoughts about LGBTQ plus identities is kind of irrelevant. These people are Jews. And we have to do better at making our spaces inclusive for all Jews. And Jewish pride is not to say that we're perfect. We have our own issues to deal with. And what's the most annoying thing about these bloody people who keep trying to kill us is that they stop us from having important conversations of our own. We have important conversations to be had in our community. And we're not here having that conversation because of Kanye West. So we need to do better. And the reality is, like they said, we're here, we're queer, get used to it. We just need to take up our space. I wear a kippah every day, and I have a tartan kippah, and the other kippah I have with me is a black kippah with a rainbow Magen David. I'm going to a high school, Jewish high school tomorrow, and I will wear that kippah. And people will see a proud gay Jew. We have to provide role models. We have to do better to create inclusive spaces. But we ourselves have to keep that flame of pride alive within us, because there will be people who reject us. There'll be Jewish people who reject us for being LGBTQ+. There'll be LGBTQ+ people who reject us for being Jewish. But our pride, our sense of self, our sense of identity must be so strong that our flame of self is not put out, I would say.
The girl who was sitting next to you, did you have a question?
Where do you teach?
I'll give you my CV. I don't teach currently. I used to teach in Hong Kong. I lectured at Hong Kong Baptist University and taught at the Harbour School, which was an American international school. And in London, where I live now, I kind of teach freelance. I teach courses online. I'm doing a course with the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism Policy about Jewish pride, and I think it will be made available shortly, so look out for that.
encourage people that we also do Jewish. In LA, we're so lucky to have Jewish pride in taking a Jewish cooking class, going to a Jewish play, Jewish summer camp, Israeli dancing. So, you know, we're talking intellectually and we're responding to anti-Semitism and everything. I'm also encouraging to take the Jewish pride inward. We're so lucky in LA.
Hi, Ben. Thanks so much for this talk. My question is for people who work in corporate. So D&I initiatives, diversity and inclusion is huge right now, and it has been for the past few years. But there isn't really a place for Jews in diversity and inclusion, especially in the corporate world, especially in the tech corporate world. I see minorities being represented, whether that's Black minorities, Asian minorities, LGBTQ+, which is great. But what about the Jewish experience? Because usually in these corporate circles, religion and politics are not allowed to be spoken about. So if they're just dumbing us down to religion, you know, what would be your advice in kind of creating a place for us in that conversation in D&I?
I think you're totally right. I think DEI has totally failed us. It is not inherently a bad thing. It's inherently quite a good thing, actually.
Just one second. Do people know what DEI is? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's this idea that, you know, in schools now and in corporate spaces that you respect, you hire, you honor people of diverse backgrounds, and they're included and they're equal, but Jews are not anywhere on that list of part of diversity. They're just pushed aside as white, or that they don't have any kind of unique experience of prejudice or racism.
Absolutely. So the way we deal with it is by advocating for ourselves in those spaces and speaking to management. And I did a DE&I training for Facebook, and that came about because the Jewish employees kept talking about it. And then the second part of that story is we have to do it ourselves. We cannot be expecting non-Jewish people to tell our stories. And not only because of everything we've talked about, because how could they possibly understand? We understand the nuance and the complexity. We're in a position to tell them. So we need to do it ourselves, and we need to train as DEI officers in our corporations, in our schools. We need to say, we'll tell our story. And they may say, okay, we'll put out a wee statement, a tiny wee statement saying, we condemn Jew hate and then all other forms of hate, because they love doing that. And then we say, no, that's not good enough. Our experience matters, we matter, and we deserve to be counted. And this is not going to be solved overnight, but we have to keep being like dogs with bones, and then saying, we'll tell you. We're not going to ask you to tell us what it means to be a Jew. We'll tell you.
I don't know about the rest of you, but and I'm a rabbi, right? And I teach all the time, but listening to Ben, I feel more empowered. I feel more proud. I feel I can be louder and more outspoken. And I hope we've all taken that away as the first step, that we have to be proud and not be apologetic and not make excuses, because it's true, we are a 3,000-year-old ancient civilization that has survived and endured when far larger ones have disappeared off the face of this planet. And to be a Jew is an honor and a blessing. And thank you, Ben. Very good. So we have some of Ben's books for sale over there, and he's happy to autograph them. And I only have 40 books. If there are more people, they're now available on Amazon as well. And thank you so much for coming this evening.